Hi everyone, welcome to PhDizzle. I'm your host Alice Cheng, and today we're interviewing Dr. Sarah McAnulty, who got her bachelor's degree in marine science at Boston University and her PhD in molecular and cell biology from the University of Connecticut, and today she is the executive director of Skype A Scientist. Let's start from when did you decide to become a scientist?
So I really liked all animals when I was a kid, and I wanted to work with animals as an adult, but I didn't necessarily want to work in a zoo, and I didn't really know what scientists did. Really, like I had like that movie perception of what scientists were and what they did, and I thought of them as being very, very smart. And I knew that I was like smart enough-ish usually for most tasks, but not a genius, not top of my class or anything. And so I was like, well, I don't really know what the end goal is other than particularly work with marine life and particularly squid. And so I was like, well, I'll go to college. I'll figure out what a scientist even looks like. Like my parents were, my mom was a therapist and my dad was a special education coordinator, like teacher, supervisor later in his career. They didn't really know what scientists did either. Like they were coming at it from education. So they were like, well, maybe you work at SeaWorld, like in an aquarium. We didn't really know like what that was. So I knew that I wanted to be involved in science early on because I assumed that animals and science went together. But I didn't know what that job looked like until I went to college and had scientists all around me. What I wanted to generally be doing came very, very, very early, but what that actual job was didn't come until quite late. Really just because I didn't have exposure to scientists and actually what they did.
So then you were at Boston University, and is that where you started doing research and you got interested in grad school, or like how did you get inspired to do your PhD?
So I was on the water polo team, and one of the friends of my fellow water polo players in my freshman year was like, if you want to be a scientist, you have to get into research yesterday. And I was like, oh, okay. So I started looking for labs that just needed a hand doing something. And so my first lab job in my freshman year was working with these little fish called sand lance. They're like yay big, and they can a little smaller, a little bigger, but generally that size. And humpback whales eat them. So they'll the fish will bury in the sand, and then the whales will basically if this is the whale's mouth and here's the sand, they'll harass the fish until they go and jump out of the sand and then go right into the whale's mouth. And so they're a really important animal for whales, and everybody cares about whales, of course. And so the question that this scientist was asking is, what is the population separation between these two populations of sand lance? And
sand
lance, lance, kind of like Lancelot.
Okay.
So they're just little, pretty boring looking fish, but very important for the ecosystem there. Yeah. And so what I was actually doing was counting the number of scales on the sides of the fish to see if there was a physical difference between these two populations. One was a little bigger, one was a little smaller, and they were like, well, is it a scale issue or a scale in terms of size and scale in terms of actual fish scales. So that was a pretty boring job, but I was just so excited to be doing science in any way and being involved that I was like, bring it, I don't care. And I was also taking fish guts, the stomachs of fish that had been preserved in the freezer, and thawing them, cutting them open, and then trying to figure out what that fish had eaten. So that was another project that
whales or just normal sized fish?
This was just guts this big, small little guts of wolf fish and other cod and whatever had been. I don't know where honestly don't know where they came from, but I was looking at half digested globs of animal and trying to figure out what they were, which was disgusting.
You're just I'm an undergrad, just give me a job.
I was I don't know what I'm doing. You could tell me to do anything and I'd be like, this is science, okay. So that's how I first got started. And then after my freshman year of college, I worked as a bat netting technician. So before you put up a wind farm, you have to make sure there's no endangered bats in the area because wind farms are pretty bad for bats. I'm not against wind farms in any way, shape, or form, but generally speaking, it's bad news for bats because not only, sometimes occasionally the blades of the wind turbine will whack the bat, but more commonly, the bat will fly up to the top of the wind turbine, and the pressure difference that happens when the blade goes by, like there's this negative pressure that happens in the air and it pops their little lungs. And so it's just like so sad. And so you need to make sure that the bats that you potentially are going to be harming are not endangered. I was like nocturnal for a summer, working 7 days a week, 3 months straight, catching bats, figuring out what species it was, whether they're pregnant.
Wow, that was like a research project?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was after my freshman year of college. And that I got paid really well for us, which was like awesome.
Who would have known? Yeah.
Yeah. Working as like consulting for companies, like wind farm companies, pays well. So if there are any young students listening, look for stuff like that. They exist. Because I couldn't afford to do one of these like unpaid internships. That was just like not in the cards for me.
That's a huge problem today in science too.
Huge.
A lot of research they don't pay for.
Especially research with animals. Like,
yeah.
But
they like it so much, and they're like, oh, it's okay.
And so they take advantage of that.
Yes.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was lucky to find one that paid. And then the following summer, I worked on cuttlefish, which are squid related. Finally, I got to do something with the animal that I really wanted to work with after my sophomore year of college, which is still very early. And I'm really grateful that worked out. I was a senior in college, and my mom got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Oh. And so I basically was like, man, I know a fair amount about ecosystems and animals and migrations and fisheries management is what a lot of my coursework was on, or at least what we talked about a lot in our department. But I was like, I really don't understand like how my mom got sick and like what went wrong and like how this is all happening. Like I'm a scientist, I feel like I should be able to understand it better than I do. And so I took an immunology class, and I took like a neuroscience class, some other cell biology sort of adjacent classes. And I hated neuroscience, nothing against the neuroscientists, but my God, it was confusing for me. The immunology I thought was so cool. And so I was like, man, if I could only bring squid and immunology together. And I was like, well, I don't have any of the lab experience for molecular and cell biology. Like I've worked on animal behavior, I've worked on animal camouflage and fish guts. I haven't worked on like Western blots or PCRs or like anything like that. And so after college, I applied to a ridiculous number of jobs to try to get like a lab tech job to get that experience that I would need going into grad school, so that I didn't just like crash and burn the second I started grad school. I ended up working at the Max Delbruck Center for Molecular Medicine over in Berlin, Germany for a year-ish, and then started grad school.
Okay, cool. And then in grad school, so now tell me about what kind of research you did in grad school, and I guess how did you pick your lab and things like that?
Yeah, so before I started grad school, I was pretty happy in the job that I was in living in Germany. I had good friends. I was playing water polo there too. I was like living the dream over there. I only applied to one grad school because I figured, if it doesn't work out, whatever, I'll just stay in Germany for another year. And so it was a pretty low stakes situation for me at the time. So there was this lab at the University of Connecticut, and the PI is named Spencer Nyholm. He is wonderful. And he was working on how the immune cells of squid can effectively tell the difference between beneficial bacteria and all of the other bacteria that these little squid are going to encounter during their lives.
Wait, how many labs in the world look at the immune systems of squid?
That's a great question. Like, not many. Like,
so you're like, oh my God, what a godsend.
As you can imagine, I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to work with the immune cells of squid, or cuttlefish would have been fine. And I was like, well, there's like almost nobody working on this. Like it's this guy in Connecticut, and then there was a woman doing octopus immune cells in Spain, but that was really more from a like aquaculture, like raising them to eat them kind of perspective. And I was like, well, either would be fine, but I'd rather live near my family. I'm from Philadelphia, and Connecticut's close to Philadelphia, and I'd rather get my PhD in the US where I speak the language and everything. So I just applied to work with Spencer, and it worked out, which felt like a miracle to me.
So hold, and before we get into the research, why did you want to study the immune system of squid?
Cephalopods broadly are a really cool opportunity within the animal kingdom to look at an animal that's super advanced, but so far diverged from us. So they diverged from us like an incredibly long time ago, but in terms of like behavioral complexity and general otherwise complexity in an animal, in terms of the invertebrates, they're just about as advanced as you get. They've got this color changing skin. They've got all this cool, both convergent evolution. Their eyes and our eyes are more similar than you would predict. So I was like, I wonder what's going on in the immune system, basically. Like, I just like to learn how those animals approach the same problems that any other animal has and compare that to what we have going on. And also see, like, do they have something novel that we don't have, that we never even thought about?
So tell me what you actually studied then. Like, what was your research project on?
It was on the immune cells of squid. And the question that I was answering, or trying to answer anyway, was how does a squid, when it first hatches and then as an adult, like, and in that transition, how does it effectively learn what bacteria are beneficial and they don't want to attack, and how do they learn what should be attacked effectively, given that they don't have an adaptive immune system? But clearly, based on previous research, they have some way of telling the difference because they attack some more than others. And so I was using a lot of microscopy to basically watch the cells interact with different types of bacteria under different circumstances, figure out, like, how do they tell the difference even in the first place? What surface molecules on the bacteria are they using to tell who's who? We, in our immune system, we've got like macrophages, which are the ones that just kind of like munch up all sorts of stuff. And then you've got your B cells and your T cells that are more like attuned to your adaptive immune system, and they deal with like the antibodies and specific responses to things that you've had before in your life. And squid just have this like one multi-purpose cell, and that cell is called a hemocyte, but it's basically like a macrophage, similar deal. So whereas we have like a whole like chess set's worth of different types of cells, they just have the one. No antibodies in a squid, no adaptive immunity, but they do kind of remember still. And we still don't understand quite how that happens, but that was part of what my work was trying to slowly piece together.
You have a big social media following and you tweet a lot and put out a lot of information about squid and how cool they are and how much you love them. So like, tell me why they're cool. I mean, for me, I feel like we always have this discussion, like, do you think they're an alien? Like, do you think it's like from another universe? But what's so cool about them?
There's so many cool things about squid that it's hard to pick just one. But like I mentioned earlier, like this complex animal that diverged very long ago from us, I think is inherently cool because everything you learn feels novel and weird and fun. And like they were given a similar opportunity as we were, but they went totally a different direction with it. I think that's really cool. I think that their adaptations are wild. Like, their ability to change color, their ability to change shape, their ability to see polarized light, whereas we can't. So we think that they are colorblind, which is bananas when you consider that they can blend into their background so well.
How do they know?
How do they do it? We don't know. But they can see polarized light. So light has a wavelength, which is the color, basically, but it also has a direction that it's going. And so we only see the wavelength. We don't see like the direction, but they can see the direction. And so in addition to changing the color of their bodies, they can also play a little bit with the polarization to signal to each other, but we don't really know how that's happening. Like, know how they're changing the polarization, but we don't know what that communication is all about. There's so much to learn about these animals and how they're operating. It's so cool. And there are so many different ways to be a squid. Like, there are the shallow water squid that you might find in a calamari plate, or there's the shallow water squid that you find like in the Caribbean that you'll see swimming with you, or all over the tropics, all over the world. But then there are these deep sea squid that you'll find like floating around near oil rigs or whatever, that are like the size of a human, but with 8-meter long angly arms. Look up Magna Pinna, Magna-Pinna, which means like big ear, but really it means big fin because their fins are huge.
Oh, wow.
And it looks out of a horror film. They have these like, their arms like splay out and then at right angles like dangle, And those danglers are like, 8 meters long, which is like, oh my God. And then there are like bioluminescent squid, and it's just, there's so much to know.
How do you feel about, you mentioned calamari, so how do you feel about eating them since you study them?
That's a good question. So I am generally for eating squid at this moment in time, and that may change because we have overfished fish so badly that squid have sort of increased their populations. Not everywhere, and we don't have the data to show that this is true of every squid species everywhere. But if you're given the choice between eating squid or eating fish, squid generally, and this is a broad brushstroke statement, but still is going to be probably the more sustainable option because they breed way faster, huge numbers.
So you started this program, Skype A Scientist, while you're still in grad school. And you're doing that today now, so you've kind of carried it out of school. But so tell me about like the genesis of that and what is it?
Yeah, so Skype A Scientist is a program that the main goal of is to basically get as many people talking to scientists as humanly possible. Because we know, like from kind of what we learned about changing hearts and minds basically, is that personal connections are the way to go. Like you're not gonna get there probably with social media, probably with a lot of ways that we're trying to communicate science, maybe not. Like museums do amazing work. You have to ask yourself, like, who showed up to the museum?
Yeah.
Like, you have to ask yourself, like, who are people forced to come to you or do you go to them? It's a complicated topic, but the main gist of why I started it was I wanted more scientists to get involved talking to people as easily for them as possible and as easily for the receiving end as possible. And so we started with schools because I figured, where do you have a good cross section of the population? In schools. So you don't need the individuals in the classroom, the students, to seek out science. Just the teacher needs to be interested and then disperse that science throughout the classroom. And so we know that science is a bit of like a PR problem. Like you watch movies, you look up like movie scientists, it's all like kooky haired white dudes, like half of them are evil, half of them are like working for the villain. It's just like, it's a bad scene. It's not what you want. I just wanted people to get the opportunity to like meet a scientist, talk about what we do, what drives us. And I thought that would generally help. And so it was right after the 2016 election I started it because all the scientists on Twitter were just like screaming into the void, like very anxious. And I was like, man, we have so much energy here. How can we harness that energy and do something positive with it? Thought about it hard for like a week, trying to figure out like how can we take this energy and do something useful. And that's how I landed on starting Skype A Scientist. And so we started with just like 2 Google forms, one for scientists, one for teachers. I thought maybe we'd get like 100 classrooms to sign up. Like 800 signed up in 2 months.
God.
It was, overwhelming. It was unbelievable. And so 500 scientists had signed up. So both sides were like, let's do it. We're in. And since then, we've grown a lot. This past semester, so from January 2020 to August 2020, we've served 6,700 classrooms and families and scout troops, libraries, groups of adults. Like we broadly serve a lot of different groups.
How does it actually work? So like if I was like from both ends, like if I sign up as a scientist, how do I know what schools I'm going to get connected with? If I sign up as a teacher, how do I pick what topics I want to learn about?
Yeah, so when scientists sign up, they tell us what type of scientist they are. There are 30 categories, and they can choose like as many of those categories that fit them as they want. They tell us what time zone they're in, the time availability they have in a week, and how many sessions they want to have in one semester. Teachers or whatever the group leader is, they'll tell us the type of scientist they want. If they want something super specific, we have a scientist search tool, so they can like type in bees, and then all of our scientists that work on bees get populated in a list, and they can specifically request scientists that either they know or that it's on the list. They also tell us if over half of their class is from a given underrepresented group in STEM, so that we can try to give them a scientist that will be as good a representation of science for that class as possible.
That's amazing.
yeah, representation is so important.
When you started this, it was just, you were like, okay, it's like people you know on Twitter, and then you put together a spreadsheet and kind of just like send it out to people.
Yeah.
And today, I mean, it's like it's your full-time job now. So like, how did you make that transition? How did you find the people to build the expertise?
It was just like flying by the seat of my pants. Like so I'm really lucky that my best friend, like since high school, is a bioinformatician. So he works with writing algorithms every day. I mean, I'm so lucky that he's in my life for so many reasons, but he really saved my butt on this one. Like, he was like, Sarah, you're matching 800 classrooms. Like, that's what computers are for. And I was like, oh yeah, like that's right. Like, it was me and like my buddy Rose from grad school. I just like brought a 6-pack to work and said, like, you know what, meet me in the conference room after work and we're gonna match for like the next 3 hours. And we just match. It was like the worst puzzle of my life. It was awful, but it was worth it. Like, I don't regret it for a minute. So yeah, David Jenkins is now working at AstraZeneca, but at the time he was a PhD student as well. And so he wrote the algorithm for me.
Now that you're full-time, tell me about funding. Like, who's like, are schools paying for it? Is it just free, nonprofit totally? Or like, how are you getting paid? You know, how does it run?
Great question. So also flying by the seat of the pants type of thing. But we are funded by, so where to begin? So I am paid. David Jenkins just this past month, the first time, got paid for this work. And we also have someone who's like a nonprofit consultant that gets paid like very part-time. The money comes from Patreon. The program is free. So the program is free for everybody. But at the end of the sign-up form, we say, if you can afford to support us, on average, matching a classroom costs about $10. The Kavli Foundation is supporting us right now. Patreon, big time, helps. And Millipore has given us some money to help support that. Last year, New England Biolabs supported us a little bit. And it's just sort of like a piecemeal patchwork kind of thing to make ends meet.
What are some of the topics that you see that schools are requesting more of? Because I imagine, like, I think of science and I'm like, oh, cancer research. So what little kid really understands or cares about that? So like, what are they asking for?
Yeah, so that's a really good point with the cancer thing, because we will have cancer biologists that don't need to talk about cancer, because cancer biologists understand physiology and cell biology. You don't need to talk about this scary disease that may have killed grandpa like in second grade. Keeping in mind that we're spanning all of school and also some groups of adults. So there may be like a cancer survivor group that wants to talk to a cancer biologist.
Oh, yeah.
So it's hard to say that one type of scientist is desired above all others, because there are so many different types of people that make use of our program.
What's your like ultimate vision for this program?
That's hard. It's so hard. So basically I want it like, and my vision, my 5-year vision for this program changes constantly, but I really want people to, like scientists broadly, to feel like they can come to our program and get the support that they need to communicate their science effectively. We hope to build, in collaboration with other groups, more training of science communication, because we know, like, I'm not an expert in all science communication. So like, for example, we're teamed up with AAAS's Dozer group. That's a group that works specifically on communicating science to religious and faith-based communities.
Interesting.
Like, I don't know how to do that, so I'm not going to pretend that I do know how to do that.
I actually have one technical question, just to kind of like funny, but it's called Skype A Scientist. Do you?
Oh yeah, you don't have to Skype. No. Skype. They just both began with the letter S. That's it.
I know. No. I get it. I was just kidding. But I was like, oh, especially now everyone's turned to Zoom. But actually, you guys were ahead of the curve, because you were doing video conferencing before it became like, necessary.
The cool thing to do. Yeah.
You're obviously super busy, but do you have time, or when you have time to unwind, what are some hobbies, or what do you like to do?
So during graduate school, I had been so laser focused on animal bacteria communication and squid that I didn't really have time to learn about other animals. And so what I've been doing a lot particularly during quarantine, is just like going into the woods at night and looking at the insects that we have here around Philadelphia. I'm like learning about beetles and moths and all sorts of other cool insects that we have right in our backyard. So I've also been learning to pin animals. Yeah, so these moths.
Is that real?
Oh, it's real, yeah.
You did that?
They're super abundant.
Oh my God.
So I would see like,
how'd you do
10
that?
of these a night. So it's so easy. So you catch the moth.
But how do you catch them?
Oh, great question. Easier than you might imagine. I hang a sheet, like a white sheet, on a string between two trees, and then I hang a UV light from that string under the sheet. And then they just come to me. Like they just come out of the woodwork and show up and like perch on the sheet. And then I take like a little box, or I take like a Tupperware container and just put it on top, scoop. And then I put them in a cooler, because if they like flap a lot, I'll show you what happens. I've learned this the hard way.
This is amazing.
This is my hobby that
I love it.
Can you see this one has like no fluff left compared to this one?
Yes.
This one was put in a cooler, and this one wasn't.
Oh.
So they'll flap, 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 and destroy themselves. And so I put them in a Tupperware container right next to an ice pack, and then they just kind of like mellow out, exactly. And then I put them in the freezer overnight or 2 nights, and then
but they're dead by then, or they're like
they're dead by then, yeah.
Okay.
And then like I have this little like divot, and then I put it in the divot, and then I put wax paper or parchment paper on top. These are just like little pipe cleaners that I pin them down with, and then I just let them sit there for like a week, and then they're done.
You could put them in like a little glaze and make a little necklace or something.
It would be a pretty big necklace, but yeah, you can.
That's true. It's like so awkward.
Fluffy that guy is.
That's so cool.
Fluffy. So yeah,
are there legs? Did you take the legs off, or how? What?
No, the legs are just like kind of tucked. There.
That's so crazy. I'm like so afraid of touching bugs. Like, did you ever have to get over that, or were you always just like, yeah, just like let me touch them?
I'm cool with bugs. I hate spiders. I'm so afraid of spiders. And when I'm out in the woods at night, wolf spiders will be like,
oh my God.
I inevitably have one near me.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not afraid to touch moths. I do generally try to pick up insects with these tweezers. Like they're like this long, big tweezers that I have, because some bite. So I don't get bitten. Like I picked up an assassin bug the other day. Assassin bugs their face ends in a spike, and they punch the spike through the prey, which is usually like a stink bug or something like that, and they inject this like inner dissolving stuff, and then they wait for it to dissolve, the innards of the animal to dissolve, and they suck it up with the same spike. It turns into like a drinking straw. It's so gross.
That's it's so freaky.
It's foul, but very cool. And so
I just like watching the video. I don't know if I would like want to just like be in there touching them, you know?
Yeah, no, I get that.
Do you have like a high-res camera? Like that would be so cool.
Yeah. So I have a macro lens on my camera, and so I take pictures of them. If you go on my Instagram, you'll see all the pictures I've been taking. I'm not very good at it yet, because I only got my macro lens in March, and so it's just been like a quarantine hobby that I've started.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, so what are you going to do with all the ones that you have now?
So my godson is obsessed with bugs, so I'm making him a display that hopefully won't be breakable. So I bought him a bug vacuum, and I'm doing this so that I can make him a thing and give it to him.
Oh my God. You should.
And also some of them will get left behind to show whenever we can go to bars again.
Oh yeah. So funny.
Oh, that's part.
It's like bring them into bars. I see you have a cat. Do you have any other pets?
I've got a bunch of pets. Yeah. I've got a snake, I've got a ball python, I've got Carjo the cat, and then Rupert the cat. And then I have an axolotl and a bearded dragon that used to belong to my grad school roommate, but then he got 2 kittens, and he didn't want his bearded dragon anymore. And so I started taking care of him, Teak.
So you live with all of these animals?
I do live with a ton of animals.
That's crazy.
Also a crested gecko. So, okay, 2 reptiles, 1 salamander adjacent animal, and then a snake and 2 cats. So 6 animals, which is too many. But like, Teak is almost not my fault. Like Teak just happened, you know? And
good for you. It's fine.
If you can support our program, Skype A Scientist, we would so appreciate it. We do that at patreon.com/Skype A Scientist, or you can give one-time donations to paypal.me/Skype A Scientist. All your donations are tax deductible because we're a 501c3.
PhDizzle!
Having fun with smart people who do cool things.